All right, we are live. Welcome,
Sweet.
welcome. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Good evening, Akansha. Good morning, Mark. How are
Yeah.
you doing today?
Good. How you doing? Nice and snowy here in DC.
It,
And it's yeah, I'm doing good as well. How are you doing when you're?
I think it's really cold outside. Like
Yeah.
it's incredibly cold outside, and it's funny because we have a dog, right? And sometimes he'll just bug us to go outside so he can go do his business. And when it's really cold, he has to negotiate with himself if he wants to go outside. So it's pretty funny to see that. So, anyways, all right. So thank you everyone for joining today. We're gonna dig into some enterprise security stuff, and primarily with the focus of authentication and how it ties to Kubernetes. And we have a special guest here. We have Marc with us, and Marc's going to be our expert while we dig into how we would use Kubernetes in an enterprise fashion. And what that really means is I don't want to be sitting there authing into clusters using kubeconfig files. We should we should take the enterprise route, and we should be doing things officially. We should be tracking our accounts. We should be staging them appropriately based off of when we onboard new users and when we have to, terminate them and offboard them so that they don't become a risk for us down the line. So there's a lot of different ways that this can be controlled. There are systems like Active Directory that help with this. There are systems like Okta, which we're going to be exploring today, that help with this as well. But one of the coolest ways to tie this all together to use something like Okta with Kubernetes is using a tool like OpenUnison. So what we're going to do today is we're going to look at our two clusters. We're using Civo Cloud, by the way, because Civo is an excellent cloud provider to use, and they're fantastic friends of us. But at the same time, it's easy to get up and going with this cloud provider. So I've got two instances of clusters running, one in Phoenix and one in London. And what we're going to try and do is get these two clusters to be authenticated with some accounts through Okta. Now, before we get into all of that, let's introduce ourselves, because I think it would be nice to really understand a little bit of our backgrounds, where we come from, why we're here, and I'll pass it to Marc first. So, Marc, why don't you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about what you do, a little bit about what Tremolo does, and what you're aiming to do for the future.
Thanks, Marino. So, Marc Borstein. Hi, everybody. I'm the CTO Tremolo Security and the author of the OpenUnison project. I have been involved with identity management for 20 plus years. Every industry that you can think of, U.S. government agencies, etc. I have been involved with the Kubernetes project since 2015. So if you've ever read the OpenID Connect docs, I rewrote those when it originally came out with 1.3, I want to say. So I've been in this community for quite some time.
That's awesome. Akansha, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Yeah, so hey everyone, I'm Akansha and I'm DevRel at Empathy Ops. So I love to interact and with people and build communities, hosting spaces, and learning about various technologies to win in the cloud native ecosystem. So before I used to do all the web development stuff, but now I've been for past couple of months I've been exploring cloud native, and this year I'm just gearing up all up for getting a few certifications as well. So yeah, this is pretty much about me.
I love it. Thank you so much for sharing your introductions. My name is Marino Wijay. I'm sure you all know me and know what I'm up to, but I spend a lot of time in the open source space around networking. So that's full stack networking. But the reality is, as a network engineer, you can't just simply focus on one thing. You can't just focus on the roads that you build. You also have to focus on the entry points and how to integrate some form of authentication. So as packets are making their way, as requests are making their way, they're all authenticated. Now, that's a very, very specific example, but we're going to focus more on user authentication into our Kubernetes clusters. Now, before we really dig into that, I was doing a little bit of digging, and Marc wrote a fantastic blog post, which I'm going to share with y'all. about the different forms of authentication and mechanisms. And while I'm pulling that up, Marc, do you also want to talk a little bit about the book that you wrote? Because I think it's important for folks to know about it. But at the same time, I also believe you're doing something additional for the next iteration of it as well, right?
Yeah, so I'm the co-author of Kubernetes and Enterprise Guide. The latest edition is the second edition. We're in the process of writing the third edition now. And what makes our book different from a lot of other Kubernetes books is two things, really. One, we call it an enterprise guide. And the reason why we say it's enterprise is that it has a large focus on integrations with external tools. So when you're talking about authentication as an example, you generally deploy something else to do the authentication. There's a touch point there with your cluster. We get into things like backups, not always the sexiest thing in the world, but kind of important when the bad thing happens. We get into Istio and talking a little bit about how you set up service mesh, not just from a cluster perspective, but also what it looks like from an application developer perspective. One of the really unique things about the book authorship is that my co-author and I come from very different perspectives of the cloud native world. Scott Sorovich, who is my co-author, is SRE, sysadmin, one of those guys who says, I'm not a coder, even though I'm like, dude, you're writing code in these scripts. You're a coder. But like, it's like, I'm a crudgety old sysadmin. I'm coming at this from a systems perspective, whereas I've always come at things from an applications perspective. So it really brings an interesting multiple perspectives to how you set up and deploy Kubernetes, how you get into things like GitOps and security and identity in a way that just is very different from other books. The other thing that is one part that we really wanted to do with this book is, I don't know about y'all, but I cannot learn anything just by reading. Like, I need to get my hands dirty and get into it and build things. And so, and I also need to connect the dots. Like, you can't draw two circles with me, show me an owl and say, this is how you do Kubernetes, right? Like, I need to see the details. I need to see the steps. And so we didn't want to build a cookbook, because cookbooks are great if it's got the recipe you're looking for, but they're often very shallow on theory. So we wanted something that covered the theory and then had labs to show the theory. And so every single chapter has a lab. And for the cost of a VM, you can get it up and running. And honestly, even just for the scripts, I give my co-author Scott all the credit in the world. He has automated kind to the point that 99% of the time when I just need a development cluster, I launch a VM, I run the script from the book, I have a kind cluster up and running, it works beautifully. And so, yeah, so check that out from Packet Publishing, available on Amazon and everywhere else books are sold. And then right now we're working on the third edition, where we're adding monitoring and logging. We're adding virtual cluster conversations. Yeah, there it is. Oh my God, they're selling it for $10.
I know. I bought my copy last, I think, a couple of weeks ago for $10. So that was actually a steal, in my opinion.
Yeah, that's and actually, so the nice thing about if you buy it directly from Packet, there's no DRM. Like, you don't have to worry about which, like, it's an EPUB or a PDF, and yeah, there it is right there, DRM free. So yeah, so please don't give it away. But I'm old school. I like my stuff without DRM on it. And then, like, if you have like O'Reilly Bookshelf and stuff like that, it's available on that as well. And then I'm hoping by KubeCon that we have everything in for the third edition. But I would expect that would probably come out sometime this spring.
That's fantastic, and I really thank you for sharing that, because this book isn't like the kind of book where it just pulls you in super deep into that rabbit hole. I mean, it starts you off really taking you through some of the foundational pieces of understanding how Docker works, understanding how Kubernetes works, understanding different authentication mechanisms. And then it really, gradually gets you to the point where you understand, why you would want to do this in enterprise security. So, while Marc is looking at, is updating this current edition to the next edition or to this next version, I mean, this book still has a ton of value for folks to go and take a look at. Now, let's move on to something more specific, because we talk about authentication, and your blog post right here, which I'll drop in the chat here, is really detailed about, you have a blog post about how we would approach enterprise authentication. But I feel like that's a little too deep for today's session, and we could re-explore that next week or the next time we do our next stream. But I wanted to really touch on these authentication types, the data stores. A lot of them are familiar to me. So for example, Active Directory. I've worked with that many years ago. I don't work with it as much, but the reality is, like we've discussed in our past Twitter space, it's still widely used. It scales very well. And there have been a significant amount of enterprises that have put massive amounts of investments in using this technology, right? And then you have the different authentication types, right? The different ways you would authenticate using, the user password combination, using an actual token, the various forms. Now, let me ask your opinion on something, right? What are the most common types you would come across in the enterprise when we talk about data sources, and then when we talk about the authentication types?
That's a great question. So the two most common that I see in enterprise are still good old-fashioned Active Directory. It's there. It's not going anywhere anytime soon. And then OpenID Connect with, whether it's Okta, whether it's Azure AD or Entra. Those are probably the two most common I see. Don't tend to see a ton of GitHub. It's definitely there. One of the things that makes enterprise authentication different than what you might be used to if you're like working at a service provider is the people who own identity are not going to be the same people who own your clusters. And so they will have their own requirements for integration. They probably have a long queue of people who need to integrate. And so a lot of times you're at their mercy. So as an example, you might get an Okta account, right? But you might just get one. And then you as the cluster owner, who has just one cluster, right? I mean, do you get in line for each of those clusters? Do you centralize that as well? Active Directory is a great example where where are the groups coming from? How are you provisioning those groups? So these are all questions that come into mind when you start thinking, how am I going to manage access to my clusters? And in the enterprise world, you have those silos in place that really adds a layer of complexity that you can use technology to help with.
I love that. Now, since Active Directory is a heavily commonly used source of data, a source of groups and users, while we can't necessarily dig into using it today, what are some of the security patterns you've seen over the years in the realms of how Active Directory has grown? Because I've used it, right? I've used it like way back, we're talking 2004, 2005, around that time frame, up until about like maybe 2009, 10, before I really flipped and focused more on networking. Over those years and in the last decade, what have you seen in terms of that growth of Active Directory? What have you seen changed? What has improved? What's different?
I mean, honestly, from you as a cluster owner perspective, not that much has changed. You're still going to access it primarily via LDAP and LDAP-S. The biggest change from the early days of Active Directory was you would use Kerberos for your actual authentication. And so a lot of the times you didn't use TLS when communicating with AD. Today, I tend, even though we support Kerberos, I tend to recommend not doing that because you're basically a privileged user as a as a cluster admin, or even as a dev working in the space. You don't want to be in a scenario where clicking on a link fires up a command that boom, you're now logged in and doing stuff, right? You want to have that pause. So that's the major difference. I am seeing that often cluster owners will start with Active Directory because it's just easier. The onboarding process is generally much simpler because all you need is a little bit of network information, a cert, and some read-only credentials, which most enterprises have a way of providing very quickly. And then my customers who are on Active Directory will often be like, "Yep, we're in the queue to move to Okta or Entra or whatever their enterprise has chosen," and but that takes time. Especially once you've got your clusters up and running, you want to be able to do that in a way that's orderly. You as a cluster owner, you have customers, right? There is this idea of breaking down silos, but at the end of the day, people like us are very expensive. People who really know their way around Kubernetes are expensive, and expecting every single application team to have their own cluster owners. I mean, you're even seeing, this concept going, Amazon, I think I was reading recently about how they've gotten away from, expertise being on every single team, not Kubernetes necessarily, but just across the board. And they're starting to centralize because it's just very expensive to do. And at some point, you just can't keep burning those $100 bills. And so being able to handle those silos, having kind of a buffer between you and external silos makes it a little easier to be able to do that migration down the road and manage it with your customers as well.
I love that. You brought up a very interesting point because it feels like we are going back to silos in some way, but I think not necessarily. The siloing that actually is supposed to be going on is to create a clear line of duty, right? A clear set of duties that folks just, you focus on this, but let's collaborate still with the systems that are available, like Git. So that's brilliant. Let me pause for a second and say hello to some of the brilliant audience members that have showed up. Hello, Siddhant. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Hello, Krish. Thanks for coming by. Hello, Amul. Thank you. Welcome, welcome, Graham. Yes, 20. Oh my gosh. Yeah, I think I dated myself there. 20 years ago. Holy, yeah, it's been a
Back in my day, we had flat files and we liked it that way.
Back in my day, you used to open up a ticket and wait like 24 hours before your AD password was reset, but you had to go over to your friend and ask for it to be.
Sadly, that's actually still not that far off of reality.
I know. All right, let's look at our clusters. I've got a couple of clusters going, and let me just pull up my terminal here. And, I decided to go hard mode this time because I normally work off of my Mac and I normally would use Linux or some Linux operating system. But, I decided to use Windows. Like, why would I do this to myself? I actually use Windows for gaming. That's all I use it for. I don't do anything else. I do light browsing. That's about it. But, it's a powerful system for streaming too. So I'm like, why not? Why not? All right. Anyways, let's take a look at some of our system here. So I got to backtrack a bit, and I got to move into kube folder, and I'm going to just output a few things. So I have two configurations here. One is a kube config for a Kubernetes cluster that exists in London, and I have another kube config for a Kubernetes cluster that lives in Phoenix, and we can verify that. One get nodes, and great. I cannot find the file because I didn't specify the file. It does help, right, if I specify the file. config file. I think I have the command somewhere up here. There we go. Okay. Get nodes. So I've got my 3 nodes there, and then we're also going to take a look at Phoenix 1. And we've got 3 nodes there. Now, Marc, do I want to be doing this? Do I want to have access to my clusters in this exact fashion or way?
No, not even a little. There are 2 aspects of this. There's the usability side. I guess 3 aspects: the usability side, the security side, and the compliance side. And anybody who's worked in enterprise, especially in security, knows there's a difference between security and compliance, right? So let's first talk about the usability side. You just spent about 45 seconds messing with configuration files and trying to figure out which was the right config, what was the right parameter, right? And you're not new to this, man. I mean, like, you know, you're kind of long in the tooth when it comes to this technology. So this is not, easy, right? So that's the first aspect of managing these configuration files, especially when you're talking about multiple clusters. And clusters are like potato chips. You can't have just one. And this is coming from a guy who is a big proponent of multi-tenancy. You're going to have multiple clusters. You're going to have to know how to manage those clusters, and managing those files is just painful in the best of circumstances. So that's the first problem. Second problem, from a security standpoint, that kubeconfig file is God mode, right?
Exactly.
It depending on which version you're in 29, they made a slight adjustment to the master config file by default, at least in kubeadm. I don't know if it's flowed off to the upstreams yet, or I guess the downstreams. But that master config file, it has a private key in it. The certificate is signed by the same root CA that manages your certificates for like your nodes. And it's not authorized via RBAC because it's a member of the group system : masters, which means it actually just bypasses RBAC entirely. So like like you can't even audit it effectively using RBAC rules. And of course you can't revoke it, right? Like, probably 5 or 6 times a year, you'll get somebody in the Kubernetes, various Kubernetes Slack channels. Hey, we accidentally emailed this configuration file out. How do I revoke it? And the answer is you rekey your entire cluster, which, if it goes well, fine, but it might not. Those are the main security points. From a compliance standpoint, almost every enterprise compliance framework says you need to know who's doing what and why. Now, the why is not something that you can expect Kubernetes to handle. That's usually some kind of audit process or some kind of request approval process, right? Some kind of workflow. But the who and what, like, that file is not tied to you, Marino. That file is just a file. So from a compliance standpoint, you need to take that file, bootstrap, put it in a vault of some kind, and never use it again, right? Because then you want to rely on your enterprise authentication system. So, every single system is this way, just about, right? Like, whether you're talking about an on-prem system with kubeadm or whatever, you get that master config, and that's the first thing you're working with. But you want to be using that as little as possible.
I agree. Now, here's the interesting thing. I think a lot of developers are not meant to be security oriented. They should know some security basics, right? Basic hygiene and whatnot. But there is a chance that sometimes you have a kubeconfig file that somehow ends up in your Git repository.
Oh yeah, that happens a lot.
Right. So let's
happened to
just
me.
touch on that. Okay.
I've never done that. I don't appreciate the accusation there, Marino. But never done that one before. But yeah, I mean, it's long lived. It's good for, I think, a year. So it's long lived. It's not bound to you. There's, once it's out there, it's out there. Like, you have absolutely no more control over it. And so, yeah, that file is very, very dangerous. And you just, I don't think people realize just how dangerous it is. It's not keeping a key underneath the mat just in case you lock yourself out. It's hanging a key next to the lock with a label that says, "This key opens the lock. Please don't use it."
It's very fascinating you bring that up, because so there's also an assumption here, right? The person that's going to be infiltrating or attacking your environment or trying to find a way in has to know what they're doing, right? So there has to be some sort of malicious intent behind some of this too. But that shouldn't necessarily mean we like discount the fact that we shouldn't put this into our policies or procedures. Like, this should exist regardless. So glad you shared that. Now, how do I fix this?
Okay, so there are a few different ways to do authentication into a Kubernetes cluster. Now, you're running on Civo. Civo is a cloud managed cluster. You don't have access to the API server configuration, which is where you would configure something like OpenID Connect. OpenID Connect is where you should go first for authentication. When done properly, it will give you near level of security of certificate-based authentication. Of course, you can also do it wrong and make it every bit as insecure. The tricky part, though, is that when you're talking about a managed cluster like Civo, like Amazon, like AKS, like GKE, like this is across the board. In order to enable integration of some kind of third-party identity provider, you need to be able to change the API server configuration parameters, like command line, how you run the API server. They don't let you do that. 1.29, which was released like what, a week ago, 2 weeks ago, has an alpha where cluster managers will have the option to allow you to do that without changing the configuration parameters. However, it's only alpha today. And quite frankly, I would be really shocked if it got widespread adoption, because it still means opening up your clusters in kind of ways that I don't know that cloud providers are going to love. It's not a object that you configure the way that you would, I'm going to create a namespace, or I'm going to create a config map. It's a static file that sits on the API server, so there's still management around that. So some questions as to what the adoption is going to be there. For cloud-based clusters, you use something called impersonation. And so the idea is you put a reverse proxy between your users and your API server, in this case, Civo. You do your authentication on the front of the proxy. So you integrate that proxy with something else to be able to authenticate, like an Okta or whatnot, or AD. And then you send headers back to the API server. This works really well. But there are a lot of moving parts, and you want to make sure this is locked down, because that identity of the impersonating proxy, if I can say, hey, I'm Marino, or I'm Akansha, or I'm anybody, that's a privileged identity. So you want to make sure that that's locked down. So you want to really take a careful look at how you approach that. So those are the two options, really. You can use certificates. You can also, if you're a cloud provider, there is, you can more easily integrate using webhooks and kube-controlled auth plugins. That is a terrible, horrible, no good, very bad idea unless you are like a cloud provider. Like if If you're Amazon and you've got people who really know their way identity and you want to build that, great. There are great reasons to use that. But if you're in your own enterprise and you just don't like OpenID Connect, that's like writing your own encryption. So you don't want to do that at all. Those are the various options. Personally, I'm a big fan of impersonating proxies. When you do it correctly, it makes it a lot easier to do the integration. It's a lot easier on the cluster owners because now they're not messing with multiple configuration options inside their API configuration, and it's consistent across cloud providers. Now, once you get that impersonating proxy, now you have to figure out how you're going to get tokens, how are you going to get your authentication configs, how are you going to get, how are you going to do the authentication, how are you going to revoke access. So OpenUnison, our company's product and project, fully open source. If you were to do like a comparison of kind of the what is often thought of as the accepted way to do it, where, okay, you set up Kubo IDC proxy, which Tremolo Security has forked and is now maintaining. JetStack stopped maintaining it back in 2021, I think. You would deploy that, and then you might deploy Dex or Keycloak, and then there are a couple of different tools, like there's Gangway. You can use that to download a config, although I think that's people have stopped maintaining that. There's the Kubo IDC plugin, where you have to distribute this kubeconfig file that knows where your identity provider is. I still think that's kind of a pain. We take a very different approach, where we say, okay, you deploy OpenUnison, we're going to do everything for you. We're going to set up your ingress. We're going to set up your identity provider. We're going to integrate with your identity provider. We're going to set up the proxy. We're going to integrate all the certificates for you. So that way, everything's that way. And then we're going to give you a portal. And on top of that, out of the box, we're going to give you dashboard access. Because I know there's a lot of people in our community that like to look down on GUIs and the Kubernetes dashboard. But man, when you want just a really quick, hey, I want to look at what's going on in my cluster, you cannot beat the ease of clicking on a button and seeing that layout and doing it securely. And the other beautiful thing about it, so I will tell you, I access my clusters off of my iPad securely. Even better, I've done it off my phone securely. You get that with your web-based dashboard. And it
Marc,
frees you from the tyranny of the keyboard.
I think the real crime here is that you're using Android with Apple.
I like Hey, you're the guy doing Windows on Kubernetes. So. Glass houses, my friend.
I love it. I love it. All right. So let's try and get this up and going. So I've got the docs open, and I want to use Istio as my ingress right now.
Yep.
Because one, obviously, I work for a company that does service mesh, but at the same time, like Istio is a de facto mesh out there that does a lot of different things beyond just ingress. So let's get that deployed. And the first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to run this command. But the problem is I shouldn't have run that because it's actually targeted against a kubeconfig file on a K8s cluster that lives on a Raspberry Pi. And yeah, so I'm going to type in lun.
Did that Raspberry Pi just go up in smoke?
No, it should be fine. Should be fine. Should be okay. All right, so I've targeted towards the London configuration, so we'll get that up and going. And then we'll do the second one as well. But I'll also show you the docs. The one thing I kind of wish I would have access to while screen sharing on StreamYard is being able to do multiple screens. Like, how on Zoom you could do multiple screens? That's phenomenal because I could share my terminal and my browser, right? But this one I can only share one. And so I'm gonna figure that out at some point. I'll figure out how to do it. Let's just take a look at some of the requirements to get this working. So I've got my clusters, right? We have to have an ingress controller, so we're picking Istio. We have to deploy the Kubernetes dashboard, but it's optional, right? From what I understand, but
it is optional. I always say you should do it.
Mhm.
I gotta tell you, the number of times I have had people say to me, I don't want the dashboard. I want to deal with it. It's insecure. And I'll say, just give it a try. And then they'll do it. And they're like, okay, I didn't actually have to do any work. It's secure. My security people are okay with it. And I find myself using it like every day now. Yes, we made it optional, but I would say go into it with an open mind. You will be really pleasantly surprised with how useful the dashboard is.
Okay.
And in fact, if you're coming down to Austin next month in February, I'm going to be doing a whole talk on the security of dashboards, why you can deploy them securely, why you should not shy away from them.
I will be in Austin. I'm going to be there with Kat Morgan because we're going to be doing an IAC talk with Pulumi and Cilium and Istio. So it's going to be good. So we're going to be at Civo Navigate. We're going to have a good time. I'm looking forward to it. It's going to be fun. Yeah. All right. So while we were chatting behind the scenes, I actually went ahead and deployed Istio for the other cluster as well. So we've got Istio up and running. The one thing that we're going to do is we're actually going to take we're going to head over to the Istio requirements here and take a look and see what it's telling us to do. So it wants us to label a namespace, OpenUnison. We don't have the namespace yet, so we have to create it. So I'm going to copy this command, right? We'll have it available. I'm going to go back to my terminal. And we're going to do everything else from the terminal going forward because I don't like flipping back and forth. And I have to figure out a more optimal way to do that so that we can see everything. I mean, I could share my entire desktop, but I don't want you to see how messy my desktop is.
Yeah, that becomes difficult to see.
Yeah, so before I do that, I'm going to go ahead and do a labeling. kubectl create ns OpenUnison.
Actually reminds me, I need to update the docs because our deployment utility will now label namespaces for you. So I got to update the docs so you don't have to do that on do it this way. But I got to update those docs because now that the utility does support labeling for you.
Nice. Okay, so I've got my namespaces created. We got to go ahead and label them. So let's type this in, -- kubeconfig. Okay. X1. Okay, cool. All right, so now I have to do some, ooh, interesting. I just realized something here.
What?
So I guess I had to install Istio with Helm.
Why?
Or maybe not.
Yeah, the demo profile.
The values.yaml is for OpenUnison, not for
Istio.
Exactly. Okay. I was like, getting tripped up for a second. I was like,
yeah.
Okay. No, we're good to go. Okay, so we've got our namespaces labeled. Now we have to go back to deploy OpenUnison. So before we do that, we have to do the Kubernetes dashboard. So I'm going to copy this over. That's not good. So let me paste this in. YAML. Can apply -- kubeconfig. Come on. Oh, okay. This one. Now, according to the docs, there are 3 supported ways to deploy OpenUnison. We could use OUCTL, we could use Argo CD, or we could do a manual deployment. What would you recommend for the easiest up and running approach?
Download the OUCTL utility for Windows and use that. OpenUnison is a more generic identity tool. And so in order to keep the deployment process a little more manageable, it's broken up across multiple charts.
Mm-hmm.
And so the nice thing about the OU control command is it does a few things for you. One, it generates your secret for you.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of times the first thing people will deploy is an authentication system, even if they're not familiar with the way Kubernetes works. And so often people say, well, I copied the secret from the website and the secret doesn't work. Well, it's because that secret is not for your environment. And you know, we're all guilty of that, right? So OUCTL will generate your secret for you. It'll generate the couple of static secrets that are needed. It will also test your configuration as much as it can to look for, you know, missing configuration options. So as an example, if you try to configure with OpenID Connect, but you don't include a client secret, it's going to give you an error to tell you that there was a problem. So I would very much recommend going with OUCTL. You could either download it that way or you could download it manually.
So I did download it manually, but I want to explore this method right here where we're, oh, something happened here.
Did it work?
No. Can you see my screen?
Yeah.
Yeah. No, it didn't work. But I also do have, so if I do an LS here, it's actually right there. Do you see OUCTL?
Yeah.
Right
I let's just go with that. I'll double check. Maybe the plugin,
That's okay.
manual plugin deployment isn't working.
Okay, so now that I have OUCTL, I could target it to specify a kubeconfig file, right?
So we're using the, that's a good question, because I know that if you do it via environment variable, it'll work. That's how I do it. I don't know if you use the config, the -- kube config, if it'll work, to be honest. That's, I have not tried that, to be honest, using the parameters, if it passes those parameters through.
Yeah. I mean, the audience is welcome to harass these load balancer IPs. I really don't care because these get terminated eventually. So,
can you set on Windows? Can you set the kubeconfig environment variable? That'll work, right?
Yeah, I have to set it, but I'd have to do it once per kubeconfig, right?
Yeah. I know we're not going to have time today, but another area where OU control really becomes fantastic is you're running multiple clusters in a scenario where you only have one connection to an identity provider. You can set up OpenUnison to be a control plane authenticator that then can authenticate different satellites, and OU control does all that for you, and it sets up those trusts for you.
That's fantastic. All right, I'm just popping in the kubeconfig .cfg. Before I share that, I just want to double check something here. I'm just going to open up a separate window so that
I just to make sure we're talking to the right cluster.
Yeah. Let's do it. Kube. Okay, yeah, that worked. I think something just didn't pick up. Oh, it's fine.
Yeah, I gotta look at the. That's a good question. The OU control, because it's just using the. It's just using the Go SDK, client Go SDK, and Helm under the covers. So I gotta see if there's a way to just simply pass those parameters through.
Yep. All right, so we're good. So I can run OUCTL now. So that's for the first cluster, and I'll have to do it for the second cluster afterwards. But if I do a kubectl get svc-n istio system, just to make sure that I've got an LBIP that we can hit. All right, so we're good to go. Okay, so let's go back to the OUCTL docs. Okay, so we don't need to patch because we have a load balancer. And dang it. Oh yeah, I have to download the values.yaml file. So I'm doing a bunch of them. Oh, go ahead.
And you'll want it for each cluster. So make a duplicate. Have one values file for each cluster.
Okay. So I've got one for London, and I want to copy this. And then I'm going to rename this for PHX. Okay, I guess I have to modify some values here, or no?
Yep, you're going to have to modify some.
Okay, so let's take a look and see what we would modify. So I'll share my little text file.
So because OpenUnison is an integration tool, we really tried to spend a lot of time making the documentation feel like a one-way path rather than trying to make you hop around in different spots. We also wanted to give you a configuration file that gave you as little to change, but as much as you needed off the bat. So like if you go to the very beginning section, the first thing is you've got the three hosts, your OpenUnison host, your dashboard host, and your API server host. These all have to point to your load balancer.
So I have to set up a local host entry, or your nip.io, I think would.
I would go with nip.io is going to be your best bet, because the problem with a local host entry is we're going to be deploying Kubo IDC proxy to handle impersonation. And that's got to be able to resolve the host name of OpenUnison to be able to trust the certificate. It can't shortcut that via an internal host. That would cause all kinds of security issues. So it's got to be able to resolve it as well.
All right, so let's take our public load balancer IP and let's go to nip.io. So all we just do is append, or prepend, I should say, our public IP to .nip.io, and that's it.
Yep. So what I'll usually do is do just like a search and replace on apps OU Tremolo dev. Apps.ou.tremolo.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, because that's the thing we throw in there.
Oh, the domain, yeah.
Yeah. And then just do a replace with my ip.nip.io.
Apps.tremolo.
You've got find. I think there's a different one for replace.
Oh yeah, that's right. It's control edit. There we go.
Apps. You got OU and app. No, that's right. Apps OU Tremolo dev. Yeah, that's right. Why is it not finding anything?
Oops. It's fine. We'll probably figure it out.
That's weird. I wonder why it's not finding it. I'm looking right at it.
Windows.
Anyway, there's only 3 places to do it. Yeah. So leave the K8s OU. So leave that part, because each one of those things need to have their own individual host name. And later in the documentation, there's a section that actually diagrams it out to explain why you need to have 3 separate host names. That's actually one of the most common things that people get hiccuped on, is they try to set those all to the same thing. That doesn't work.
Okay.
So now you're using Istio. So if you go back to the Istio config, it tells you that you need to set your ingress type to Istio instead of Nginx.
So let me just find this here. Control F network. Can't even find that. What?
Yeah, well, that's because it's not network.ingress, because it's the YAML. So
ingress type.
yeah, so you change that to Istio. Now, you use the demo Istio deployment, right?
Correct.
So that automatically set up a virtual gateway, and the default is going to look for that. So you don't have to worry about labels for that. The next configuration point you should set is, see where it says K8s cluster name, OpenUnison-CP?
Mm-hmm.
You should give that, maybe London, or, something identifiable. It's just a label, but it makes it a little easier to keep track of configurations.
Okay. There we go.
And then you've got enable impersonation as false. You want to set that to true because you're using a managed cluster. So that'll deploy Kubo IDC proxy for you.
Okay. And then the rest is good?
Yep. Then we can go down to our, scroll back up, because now we got to configure authentication. So out of the box, we support Active Directory, OIDC, GitHub, and SAML.
Mm-hmm.
We comment them all out for you. So that way, you don't accidentally turn something on. But if you tried to run this command, or you tried to run this config, you control it, say, nope, this is no good. You need to pick an authentication method.
Yep.
So you're using Okta, right?
Yep.
So that's pretty common. So uncomment the OIDC section.
Oh, I see that GitHub's like super easy.
Yeah, GitHub's super easy. SAML's actually the easiest, because there's no secret that you have to worry about. But SAML is kind of a dying breed for a lot of very good reasons.
Mm-hmm.
So now this is where we talk about being an integration tool. You've now got to open up Okta and do a little bit of work.
All right, let's log into Okta quickly. How are you doing for time, though? You're okay for time?
Oh, I'm good for time, yeah.
All right. So give me a second here. I got to fix something, but why don't you tell us a little bit about Okta and how it came to be and some of the integrations for Tremolo. I'm just going to pull myself out of the camera for a second, but feel free to talk about that for a few.
Yeah, Okta has been around for about 10 years now, I think. And it's part of a larger movement towards identity as a service. Being able to maintain identity systems outside of my local environment, outside of my enterprise. The great thing about Okta is you don't have to manage anything from a upgrades perspective or whatnot. But at the end of the day, like anything else, it has its own quirks. And so, as an example, getting into the OpenID Connect spec, there's like 200 RFCs, I think, that you have to know in order to know all of OpenID Connect. I am not going to pretend to know all those specs. And quite frankly, you shouldn't either. But that means that there is a lot of room for variation. And so one of the things that you as a cluster owner need to be mindful of is not so much, is Okta better than Entra, is better than, which one's best? You've got to deal with what there is. But what are some of the opinions of these systems? So as an example, Okta does not include groups in the ID token. You've got to make a call out to the user info endpoint to get the groups. Compare that to Entra. Entra, or Azure AD as it used to be called, includes the groups in the ID token. So that's one less step you have to do. But the groups come back with a type 4 UUID, not a group name. and you need something to do that translation if you're going to use your RBAC bindings based on group names. And so OpenUnison handles those different things for you in a way that is transparent to you. You know, we've taken our years of experience deploying these things and built it into the system and said, okay, these are the questions you really need to answer.
I love that. I love that. I just want to say, hey, Steve, welcome. And hey, Kim, welcome to the stream. Very excited to have you here as well. And you have a question for us. So what is the difference between authentication and authorization for Kubernetes? You're seeing projects that will differentiate themselves by the word. Yes. So the simple thing about the two is that authorization is really about what you're allowed to do, and authentication is really your identification into a system. So you'll see a lot of environments that employ both, because you need an entry point to validate whether or not you're allowed to enter the system. And once you've been authenticated, right, now you have to face another layer which authorizes you to do certain things. And this is really about role-based access control, you know, deciding based off of your role and function what you're allowed to do. So there's a classic example of, if you have a number of services running in Kubernetes, let's say you have 3, service A, service B, and service C. Service A can talk to service B, and service B can talk to service C, but service A cannot talk to service C. That is authorization, right? That's effectively just preventing systems and providing a mechanism to achieve somewhat of zero trust. Zero trust is a marketing word, kind of, but it's another mechanism to just limit what your services are allowed to do. So you minimize the possibility of a breach, you minimize the possibility of a vulnerability, something going wrong, etc. But authentication, on the other hand, is what we're talking about in this particular stream. You know, how do we verify and validate you are who you say you are? And based off of those credentials, are you, allowed to get into the system? So what we're going to do is we're going to use Okta and some users built into Okta to try and authenticate into our cluster. So now we have an entry point into our cluster. That doesn't necessarily grant us the ability to do whatever we want inside of our cluster, because we'll come back and revisit that at a later time. Marc, any thoughts around that?
I think that's a great. Great summary. One thing to keep in mind when you're looking at different products and projects is you kind of hit on it, Marino, with the buzzword term, right? Often the marketing will kind of shadow what you're doing. The key, I think, is just understanding the difference between who are you versus what you can do. Like, that is like the simplest way to break them apart. You'll often find that authorization products and projects are far more complex than authentication products and projects, because it's just a more complex topic. It's much less mechanical. Oh, we can't hear you, Marina.
Oh, sorry about that. Don't want to do it again. I just want to say thank you for the question, Kim, and thank you for that extended answer there, Marc, because I think it's worth noting the differentiation between the two and how the two work together. So let's get this configured. We've got a few more minutes, because I know I have to leave in probably the next 29 minutes before I get in trouble by my next meeting. But we're at this point now. We have to continue the configuration. We have to look at Okta. So let's take a look at my Okta configuration right now and see what I am missing, what needs to be done before we can get to a completed state.
And then are you going to just share your? Hey, there you go. Okay, so first thing you're going to do is go over to applications, and we've got this all documented with screenshots. Go over to applications, and then you're going to need to create a application. So create an app integration, and it's going to be OpenID Connect, and then it's going to be a web application.
Nice. All right. So let's click next.
Okay. So give it a name, my clusters, whatever. And then your next configuration step is going to be, see where it says sign in redirect URIs?
Mhm.
You're going to want to click add URI and then go back to your configuration file.
Okay. So y'all can't see that, but that's okay.
So in the network section where it has your OpenUnison host,
Mhm.
change
Okay.
that, get that. And so your redirect URI is going to be https://auth/OIDC. And yes, this is all in the docs.
I love this.
The importance of this is that you don't want what's called a relying party. Your clusters in this instance are a relying party. You don't want a relying party to be able to say, hey, Okta, hi, I need to authenticate this guy named Marino, and go send all the really important information off to this bad place over here because it's all redirects and it's all disconnected. So you have to explicitly tell Okta, this is a place that the user can be redirected to when it's all over. Don't worry about sign out redirect URI for now. Don't worry about trusted origins. So, well, not quite yet. For controlled access, click on the first one, allow everyone in your organization to access. And then now you can go ahead and hit save.
Okay.
So we're not quite done on the screen yet. Go ahead and click on, scroll down. Keep going. Actually, scroll back up. Keep going to the top. So click on the sign on tab. It's been a while since I've done this. Scroll down. Here we go. Nope. Where is, oh, nope, sorry, scroll back down. Go back to sign on. Click edit next to OpenID Connect token. Nope, in the middle. It's a middle section. Go a section up. Yep. All right, there we go. So where it says group claims type, group starts with, keep it as filter. And then see where it says starts with? Click on that drop down. And then say match regex. We're going to go with the, and then do .star. So this way we're going to send all the groups for now. In enterprise deployment, you'd want to limit how many groups by some kind of naming convention, but let's keep it simple. So go ahead and hit save. So now go back to general and see where it has a client ID. You're going to want to copy that.
Okay, we've got the client ID.
You go back to your config, and the first option is going to be client ID. So you're going to go ahead and drop that in there.
Hold on, let's look for a client. Oh, there we go. OIDC, right?
Yep.
Yes, got it. Okay, cool. Okay, got that in there.
Now, the next thing you're going to want to copy is you see client secret. Go ahead and copy that and put it in a file somewhere on your system.
Okay, I'm going to do that. And I'm going to stick it on my desktop for now and deal with it later. Okay.
Yeah. Okay. So the last thing you've got to configure here is go ahead and you need to tell OpenUnison who the issuer is. Now with Okta, this is pretty easy. You see how the URL for you're in right now is like dev-914-admin? Just take the dev-914 part. For some reason, they don't make this easily copy from the UI, which is a little annoying. So now go into your config file and where it has issuer. Yep. Okay. Now, there are a lot of different options in there for streamlining the configuration, for adding additional layers of security. So for instance, we'll automatically generate network policies for you, which because of impersonation is important. So don't want to bother with it here. Depending on how you deployed it, because Civo out of the box, you're probably using Flannel and
Right, exactly. I was just going to ask you that.
Network policies.
Exactly. I was just going to say, yeah.
So that's that. Also, starting with Kubernetes 1.24, I believe, the default became to have time-limited secrets for token identities. However, that's still, I think, 24 hours, if I remember correctly.
600 seconds, it says here.
Well, that's the minimum you can do. So we can actually override that to have. But again, let's for the first run, you can always change these things later pretty easily.
So let me just look back at that file. I'll share with you all so you can see.
We're done with the Okta configuration at this point.
Okay, so this is what my values file looks like right now. I'm not messing around with network policies. This is one thing I wanted to know about, though. Ingress Nginx. We're not using Ingress Nginx, though.
Yeah, you've got enabled set to false, so it doesn't matter. But
oh, nice. Oh, got it.
Yeah, what the default policies will do is they'll say, okay, I will only allow access from whatever namespace is hosting my ingress, right? So we're using the demo profile, so it'd be a STO system, right? And then, they're a webhook, so I got to allow it from the API server. And then potentially, if you've got Prometheus running, we've got a metrics endpoint that you can just drop into your Prometheus configuration. So you got to open that up. But for here, it wouldn't really matter even if you did enable it because Flannel doesn't support network policies.
Yeah, that's fine.
So that's everything you need to get started. Out of the box, we're going to generate self-signed certs for you. If you wanted to use something like a cert manager, there's a configuration option to disable that and say, no, let's just use the annotations on the config objects. But yeah, just out of the box, we generate all your certs for you.
Okay, love it.
So now you're at the fun part of actually deploying. So I think you're down to deploy with OUCTL.
Oh yeah, because I'm not using Helm, right?
Yeah, well, yeah, you still, so under the covers it's Helm. It's just OUCTL is coordinating the charts for you. So you don't have to sit there and wait for things to get going. It just coordinates everything for you.
Okay. Let me reshare my screen 1 second here. Where is? Sorry, I've got too many windows open. This is the
story of my life.
Love it. Okay, share screen. Let's try this again. Okay, so we are here. LS, I've got my OUCTL there. We're going to do Helm repo add Tremolo Nexus. Okay, and then we're going to do a Helm repo update. Okay. So now we need a OUCTL install portal -us path to secret file, which is my desktop.
And you're on the right cluster, right?
Yeah, the London one. CTL. Oh gosh. Users.
You didn't rename it, so it's going to be OUCTL-0.0.11-WinExe. If you want to just, there you go.
Yeah.
I think it's my desktop, actually.
Yeah, because this is what I... What?
Are you logged in as that user?
No,
or are you logged in as an administrator?
No, I'm logged in as that user, so I'm going to do this. I'm going to move it to the kube.
Yeah, I was going to say, it'd probably be a lot easier if you just move it.
Yeah, so it's in my kube folder now. Yeah, there it is. And then path to YAML. So that should be C. What was it called again? Values lun.text, right? Or does it have to be a YAML?
It should work. It doesn't care. It's just going to load it. It's going to parse it as a YAML, whether it is or not. So it should be okay. Oh, wait, but that's not right. Because that's the -s for the secret. Wait, is values is your YAML? Ah,
yes.
No, I confused myself. Go ahead, run it. You're good.
Okay. I'm following the deploy the portal command here. So let's see.
Oh, actually, I gotta fix the documentation. We automatically enable the STO label on the namespace. So you didn't have to label it. So there are 3 charts being deployed. The first chart is the operator. We recently rewrote our operator to slim it down quite a bit. We've kind of gone full circle where we started off with a script that deployed OpenUnison. Then when the operator craze happened, we said, okay, we're going to use an operator to do all the deployment. And that was a mess, trying to use an operator as an install tool. So then that's when Helm 3 came out, and Helm 3 actually didn't require Tiller anymore. Remember Tiller?
Remind me what Tiller is.
Oh God, Tiller was the back end for Helm. So Helm didn't talk directly to your API server. Helm talked to Tiller, and Tiller talked to your API server. And Tiller had global access. So all somebody had to do was own Tiller, and your cluster was owned. But Helm 3 got rid of Tiller and said, nope, we're just going to talk directly to the API server for you. So it became a much more secure tool out of the box. So that's when we switched to Helm, scaled back the operator basically to manage certificates for you. And so once the operator gets deployed, the second chart is the orchestra chart. This does most of the heavy lifting as far as the infrastructure is concerned. So it sets up your deployments, it sets up your secrets, it sets up your config maps, all those various things. And this is the longest one to run just because, and we can see now we have one ready pod.
Okay,
because so I was wait for one to shut down.
I was like freaking out there for a second.
Yeah, no, it's Java, so it takes a while. Yeah, this is a big pod.
No, that's understandable.
And then once this is done, the last chart is going to be orchestra login portal. So this has all of the application level configurations. OpenUnison is a identity platform. All of the configuration options are configured through CRDs.
Okay.
So that's what makes it so easy to configure post-install, because you're not recompiling, you're not, dependent on the libraries built in. It's all YAML. So right now it's deploying the UI that you'll see, which is just a pod with Nginx. And now you're just about ready to go. There's one more step you need to take because of Istio. If folks that are not familiar with Istio and might be familiar with Nginx that just magically is able to load secrets from everywhere, Istio is not. So you need to copy the OU TLS certificate secret that was generated. Yeah, that command does it for you. So you've got to copy that into the, but that's a sed because, you're using Windows. So if you want to just pipe it out, edit it, and whatever. But all you're doing is you're getting a secret and copying it into the Istio system namespace.
Okay.
So that way your virtual gateway can pick it up.
Is there a given name that we want to call it?
Same name, OU TLS certificate.
Okay. Let us.
Now, obviously, while you're doing that, in a production environment, you don't want to do this, but you don't want to be using our certificate generation either. You want to use something like a cert manager that's going to keep these things up to date for you and is trusted by your enterprise.
Okay. Oh, so we're just moving the same certificate to.
Yeah, you're just moving the certificate and key into Istio system, so that way your virtual gateway can pick it up.
Okay, give me a second to just create the cert and then actually create a new secret in Kubernetes. It's going to take me a second.
Now, we won't have time today, but we're using Istio here, and the cool thing about this configuration with Istio is it also supports Kiali out of the box. Whether you're running on-prem or whether you're running on-prem or in a cloud, Kiali, I actually donated the code to do this. Kiali will either accept a token or impersonation headers the same way the dashboard will, Kubernetes dashboard will. So you can use it in the same way, and it's just a matter of deploying an additional Helm chart.
Oh, this is good. I'm gonna paste this in here. Save it. Okay. So one question, is it storing this new secret in the same namespace?
In the Istio system namespace. Yeah, the same namespace as wherever your virtual gateway is.
All right, give me 1 second. I'm just going to share my screen so you can see what I'm doing. Share. kubectl create secret dash dash. What did we call this one? OU secret.
OU-TLS-certificate. Or whatever you name down your hard drive, I guess.
File. It's going to scream at me because I'm probably missing. See, I knew it. I forgot the flag. What is it? From config? Is it from?
It's
from
no,
literal?
it's from dash file.
From dash file, yeah. That's what I did. Is it from config? Maybe. Someone's gonna say. Someone's gonna tell me what it is. Create secret from file. Here, I'll just look it up. It's dash dash from file equals kubectl create secret generic.
Oh, right.
Damn it. That always gets me.
Yeah.
Create secret generic. Thanks, Kubernetes. All right, there we go.
So now you should be able to log into OpenUnison, the URL that was popped out at the end. Or just go to HTTPS, the OU host in your configuration file.
Oh, yeah, that's right. So let's see. I'm going to paste this into my web browser.
Actually, real quick, even before you do that, look at the pods in the OpenUnison namespace.
Okay, kubectl get pods dash OpenUnison.
Yep.
They're running?
So
okay.
It is running. Hold on a second. Take a look at the kube OIDC proxy orchestral logs. That just might not have caught up with the certificate getting loaded. So this is how you know if Istio has been set up correctly, is the kube OIDC proxy pod will not get to a ready state without the certificate being set up correctly. Mm-hmm. So K8s OU, so it looks like it's still unhappy. Show me the secrets in your Istio system. It's not a generic secret. It's a TLS secret.
Oh, right.
So that might be keeping Istio from loading it.
Okay. Let me delete that secret. So secret TLS.
Yeah.
No, that doesn't.
Oh, because it wants to do. Can't you do just a create F? What's in OU secret.txt? That's not a YAML file?
No, it's just it's actually where the secret is stored from that original.
Right, but it's not YAML. What's in
No.
OU secret?
It's just the text file, but I can rename it to a YAML if you want.
Right, but what's in it? Is it just the cert or is it the key pair?
It's the same secret YAML configuration. Oh, hold on a second. So remember this command that I ran, the one that allowed me to output the secret into a YAML, and then I was going to rerun it from a file, but it wouldn't do it because of sed, and I can't run sed in Windows.
Right.
So I actually copied the contents of what it outputted as a YAML and then put it into a file. But what I think I should do is just turn this into a YAML file, and that might fix it.
Well, okay, but I think you're making it too complicated. Just edit the file, change the namespace to Istio system, and then just do kube control create -f.
Yeah, that's true. I just have to add the namespace here.
Because I think what happened is it created a secret with the YAML as a data point in, or not a data point, data entry. It didn't create an actual TLS secret.
Mm-hmm.
So if you just do create -f, well, -f point to the file.
Yeah.
There we go. All right, now take a look at the OpenUnison namespace.
-Istio. Okay, so it's there.
Yep, beautiful.
Okay,
and
beautiful.
We're running, so you should now be able to log in to OpenUnison.
Okay. Oh, wow. Okay, you're right. Holy shit. Okay, hold on a second. Yeah, I think I might have gotten a little bit ahead of myself here, but hold on. Let's look at what I'm seeing on screen together, because I might be hitting another issue as well. So, 5 minutes to spare. Actually, I have a little bit more than that.
We'll get there. You're in the home stretch.
Okay, so this is my Chrome tab, right? And I'm going to paste this. Well, that's not it. That's not what I want. Hold on. I'm just going to pull that host again.
Oh, almost. Client ID, response type code. That's usually the resource owner authorization server denied the request. Let's go to Okta.
All right, let's look at Okta.
Maybe look up that particular error in Okta. It's usually just a config option.
We are almost there, though. That's a good thing.
Request. All right, let's click on Kubernetes-clusters. All right, that's your client ID. Let's look at your values.yaml.
Let's But 1 second here.
Go to OIDC, client ID. That looks correct. That looks correct. All right, so it starts with a 0 OA and it ends in a 5D7. All right, go back to Okta.
Here, I'll copy this, and then we can just do a Control F just to make sure that it aligns.
Yeah.
Yep, so it aligns.
Yep. So the client secret is probably fine. Scroll down. All right.
This one?
HTTPS. Nip.io auth OIDC. That's okay. Allow while. Let me fire up my own Okta and make sure I've got.
Almost there, and I love it.
Almost there.
Almost there.
If it worked, nobody would believe that we were doing it live. All right. Scroll up a little bit. Go to General Settings.
Yep.
All right. Client authentication is client secrets. Client acting on behalf of user. Scroll down a little bit. Authorization code. Technically, we don't need a quick edit. Quick refresh token. And scroll down. Keep it at rotate. Rotate token, that's fine. User consent. Oh, that might be it. Uncheck require consent.
Okay.
And then let's see here, HTTPS/authOIDC, that looks good. Login app only, that looks good. All right, you can go ahead and hit save. And then Federation Broker is enabled. Then click on the sign on tab. Up at the top.
Yep, sign on tab. Okay.
All right, OpenID Connect, that looks good. Token credentials, automatic. Issuer is dynamic. Filter, groups, matches, redx, .star, that looks good. Sign-on policy, default sign-on rule, that's fine. All right, click on assignments. App is implicitly assigned to users, that looks good. All right, try going to OpenUnison again. Let's see if that fixes it.
So the same host?
Same host, yeah.
Let me just copy this again.
Technical, see where it says technical details? Identity provider unknown.
Error code access denied.
Identity provider unknown. Access denied. Go back and.
Is it because I have no sources?
You're logged in with an active user. Try an incognito window just out of curiosity.
I know why. Okay, here's why. Okay, let me take that same URL again and then try this in another browser. And I probably have figured out why the case is. I use my Gmail account that gave access, so it's probably trying to auth me in as my Gmail at the moment. And it's not seeing that because let's see, will this work? Okay, now it's asking me for a password, and huzzah!
Oh, okay.
Sorry, I know you can't see what I'm seeing, but here's my suggestion. Akansha, why don't you use your Empathy Ops account, right? And go to this URL I'm about to share to you, okay?
Okay.
You reset your password, right? Remember? You got an email.
Yeah.
Did you reset your password?
Yep. I set it to a new one.
Okay, so I'm gonna, how do I share this to you? Go check your Twitter. Go check your Twitter DM. I'll share the link. Ah, dang it. Okay. And then go to that link, right? I'm gonna stop sharing my screen.
Mm-hmm. It says your connection is not private. Then
That's okay. That's okay.
Then
Proceed.
I move on. Yeah.
You want to share your screen though?
Yeah, I'm unable to go ahead.
Oh, you can't share your screen.
No, I mean, yeah, just wait.
Whoa!
Oh God.
It's the last tab. Oh no, this is perfect. Okay, this is good. You're getting to where I got to. So just type in your password, right? Whatever your password is. And just X out of that thing.
Beautiful.
Okay. This is exactly it. Okay.
Okay, so go ahead and get rid of the update password there, Akansha. All right, so you've got, go ahead and look in the upper left-hand corner where you got that really weird random, that's your sub. So that's what Okta says your user ID is. Now, I know cluster operators love to use email address. Please don't. Email address is an anti-pattern in the identity and security world. Names change for various reasons. And tying an identity to a email address and a name, a person's name, is going to cause you pain long term. So now you only have one role, right? Everyone. That's because you haven't defined any groups inside of Okta. So now go back to home, and then click on the dashboard. Yeah, go ahead and don't worry about the certs. It takes a second.
Okay.
You're in, and you can see up there in the right-hand corner, there's a little bell, upper right-hand corner. You don't have access to anything, but you're in the cluster. So let's go ahead and give you access to the cluster. Marino, in the OIDC section of the docs, there's a little RBAC snippet to grant access as a group. You're on mute, buddy.
I have to find that mute button. Oh, sorry, I have to find that. Give me a second here.
And what I want you to do, Marino, is where it says group K8s-admins, change K8s-admins in the subject to everyone with a capital E.
So sorry, where am I seeing this in the docs again?
So if you look under choose an identity source, OpenID Connect RBAC findings.
Hold on a second here.
Can I send you a link?
Yeah, you should be able to drop the link there. Might be easier than me try to find it.
I see comments. Oh, here we go.
Perfect. Okay. Okay. RBAC bindings. Oh, you want me to just create that? Got it. And what do I change the name to?
So change it to everyone, because that's the group right now that Akansha is a member of.
Okay, give me a second here. Yeah.
Now, obviously, in real world, you wouldn't want to grant everybody cluster admin access, especially after we spent the last hour and a half talking about why you should not do that. But you know, for here, for the demo, it'll work. So once you create that cluster binding, we should see the window change pretty quickly.
Okay. Now, if you refresh your screen, you should be able to see something.
Nope. Did you set the group to
Everyone?
everyone capital E?
Oh, that would probably do it.
Yeah, it is case sensitive.
That would definitely do it. But I like this because we're all learning that case matters.
Case matters in Kubernetes. There you go.
Oh, yeah.
Love it. All
So
right.
now you have secure access to the dashboard, which is great, right? Don't get me wrong. But what about your day-to-day work using kube control? So this is where things start to get really fun. Go back to your OpenUnison tab, Akansha. Akansha, I gotta get your name right.
Yeah.
So if you go back to OpenUnison, it's a separate tab. So it's the tab to the left of where you are. If you go up to your Chrome tab, there you go. So click on Kubernetes tokens. So now this is the biggest difference between OpenUnison from a user perspective is we don't give you a kube control configuration to download. We generate your kube control on the fly. So
it's short-lived too.
It's short-lived. So that's the thing is if you scroll down a bit and you look at ID token, that token is only good for 1 minute. That token will fail after 1 minute. And in fact, the way that we're set up is your refresh token, which will refresh that behind the scenes for you automatically, is usually set to time out after 15 to 20 minutes, depending on what your corporate policy is on web application timeout is. What are you on? Is this Windows or is this Mac?
Mac.
Okay, so scroll up.
Yeah.
And then you click on see the little box next to kube control command? Over to the left. They're the double boxes. Those are the copy boxes. So go ahead and the one next to the kube control command, go farther down. That's for Windows. There you go. Click on that. Now open up a terminal.
Okay. Just
There you go. Make that a little bit bigger.
How do we make it big?
Command Shift plus.
Okay.
All right, and then what I like to do, and I'll send it to you in the chat, is I like to create a temp file for my kube config. So this is the command I like to run on my Mac. So yeah, there's a lot going on here, but what's important is it's creating your kube configuration file from scratch. So there's nothing to distribute. There's no anything to trust ahead of time and to keep updated. And if you're one of the poor, unfortunate souls who has to do this through a jump box, you paste this into your terminal window. It just works. And it works on Windows and Linux. So if you go ahead and hit enter.
Yeah.
Oh, look at this. All right.
Now go ahead and look at your nodes, right? Kube control get nodes.
Nodes.
Yeah. The bits are
Love
getting
it.
So look, now here's the magic trick.
Yeah.
This is not the magic trick. Okay. Go ahead and type in watch kube control get nodes.
No, watch.
You need the kube control.
Watch
in
kube
front of-
control. Watch
Yeah.
Oh,
kubectl get nodes. It's -- watch. Kube control get nodes get -- watch.
Oh, you can do that too. Watch is a
No.
Yep. Get rid of the watch entirely and do kube control dash nodes, get nodes dash watch.
okay.
Okay, so leave this here. Go back to OpenUnison.
Mm,
Log out. Click the log out button. Yep. So we've been talking about logging in. How do you end somebody's session? How do you log someone out? No, don't do that.
Don't log back in.
Leave it as is. Now go back to your terminal. Now we're going to give this a minute. Because those sessions are short-lived, after about a minute, kube control is going to automatically try and refresh your token for OpenUnison. And it'll fail because the refresh token is no longer valid.
Mm-hmm.
So actually hit Control-C and let's just try doing it again from the beginning.
Yeah, hit Control-C and then just up arrow. Or, yeah, and then, yeah.
Nope.
No.
That's fine too, but go ahead and do kube control get nodes.
Without the watch.
Oh.
Yeah.
There you go. Perfect.
Yeah.
See, there you go. You're not able to connect anymore because that refresh token is now invalid. Now, that's great that you can log out, right? But what happens if we need to kill your access?
Mm.
So
we're going to pause right here because
right.
Yeah, because I think this is great. We managed to get to a point where now we can authenticate, right? We can get into our clusters, right? And we can see the various access levels that we have. We can modify that through a role binding if we want to. But let's talk about what we would want to do next, right?
Yep.
So let's say we're coming back here in 2 weeks to do another stream, and we want to figure out how to take this a step further, because obviously we don't want to be sitting here messing around with kube configs all the time. We also want to offboard users, and we want to kill their access, like you just said. So let's do that next time around.
Yep.
We'll maintain the same setup. We're not going to mess around with anything. Leverage what we've already built, and then we'll continue to build on top of it. Start implementing some policies. Maybe we get into the authorization side of things. Explore the other mechanisms for authentication, and we'll be able to continue to ride this rocket ship.
Perfect.
Love it. All right. Well, this is a really long session. I thought we'd be done in about an hour, but I'm glad we went through this because there were some things I learned through the process, and I'm sure that Akansha learned a ton as well. And I'm sure that folks that were listening in and watching probably gained a lot of insights as to how they would rather do Kubernetes authentication versus having to manually manage kube config files. So having said that, I'm going to share something quickly with y'all. I just want you all to go take a minute and follow what's going on. Actually, why can't I? Can you see that? Okay. Take a minute, go follow Tremolo, go follow Empathy Ops, go visit Civo Cloud, because this is where we did all the work. We use Civo Kubernetes to make this possible. And go check out OpenUnison on GitHub. Go star the repo, go fork it, try it out for yourself. If you run into issues, hit us up, and we'll be able to walk through some of the issues maybe on another stream as well and dig further and deeper. So any last parting thoughts here, Marc, before we end our stream for today?
Thanks everybody for coming, and go ahead and hit me up on social, ask me questions. I love chatting with people. You can also find me in the Kubernetes SIGAuth Slack. I'm there all day long. So even if you don't have questions about OpenUnison, I love helping folks out with Kubernetes.
Awesome. Well, thank you all again for coming by. Have a great afternoon, morning, evening, night, wherever you are. we will see you again in a couple of weeks. And we are having a Twitter space in a couple of days to talk about Docker development and DevOps. So we hope to see you there, and check us out on Twitter. See y'all.
Yeah.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.